My name is James Fitzpatrick, and on behalf of Building America's Future, I'd like to welcome you to our ongoing America's Future Tour. This is a policy series launched late last year to address some of the most pressing and important issues of our time. The mission of Building America's Future is to inform and empower Americans to take ownership of our country's policy direction and demand that our government at all levels enact policy reforms to improve the lives of Americans and make America's future strong. Today, we are discussing safer communities for Pennsylvania. As a thought leader with deep experience in national security and an Army veteran, we look forward to hearing from our special guest, Dave McCormick. With that, I'm going to turn things over to York County District Attorney and Republican nominee for Attorney General Dave Sunday, who is going to serve as our moderator today. And I'm going to welcome all of our panelists, and Dave's going to introduce them.
Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody.
All right. Well, good afternoon. Oh, do you want to go first? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. It's wonderful to see everybody. We have an outstanding panel today to discuss an extremely important topic. And so we're just going to jump right into it. And I'd like to go ahead and do a really brief introduction as to who's here with us today. I'm Dave Sunday. I'm the York County DA. We have Andrea Parenti, and she's of counsel with Dylan McCandless King. And she's a past president of the Pennsylvania School Board Solicitors Association. Thank you for being here with us. We have one of Pennsylvania's most famous sheriffs, Sheriff Mike Slupe. It's an honor to see you. And am I wrong about that or what?
No, you're not wrong.
Exactly. And so he's been the sheriff here in Butler County for 15 years. He has more than 3 decades of law enforcement experience. He's a tremendous leader statewide with the sheriffs. And so it's great to have you. Seated to my right is a man who really needs no introduction, but we have Governor Tom Corbett, who served as Pennsylvania's 46th governor. He was also our former state attorney general. He was a United States attorney and chair of the Pennsylvania's Commission on Crime and Delinquency. Welcome, Governor. Seated to the governor's right is the Attorney General Bill Barr, who served as the top law enforcement officer in the United States for both Presidents Donald Trump and President George H.W. Bush. Attorney General Barr, is an absolute honor and privilege to have you here with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. And to his right is Dave McCormick, who of course is our candidate for the United States Senate. And previously he served as the Undersecretary of the Treasury and Deputy National Security Advisor for President George W. Bush. Dave, it's great to see you, and thanks for joining us as well.
Thank you,
Yep. So we have a tremendously important discussion for today, and Dave, we're going to kick it right to you for an introduction.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you all so much for being here, and thank you for this incredible panel, and my good friend Attorney General Barr for coming to Pittsburgh and spending time with us today, and Governor, always an honor to be with you. And Dave Sunday didn't mention he is our candidate for Attorney General here in the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So Dave, thank you for chairing this. Before we get into the topic of the day, I think we're just at a moment where we need to reflect, at least for a second, on last night's debate. And as someone who's a combat veteran, someone who's first and foremost an American before party, I think we have to say, boy, we saw the possibility is that our commander-in-chief is not up to the job, and that's a scary thing to say and a sad thing to say. But as you think about this election coming up and you think about the future, we're at a precarious moment in the country. And it's the kind of thing where even the 25th Amendment, where the members of a cabinet ask themselves whether the commander-in-chief is up to the task, is probably something that's worth consideration. And that's a scary thought. And that brings us to the topic today, which is crime and the lack of safety, the lack of security that so many Pennsylvanians and so many Americans feel. And we've got people on this stage that are far more expert than me on this topic. But I'm on the campaign trail every day, and I hear the same things over and over again. We have two dynamics that are working side by side that put our security and our safety at risk. The first is open borders. And I had the opportunity to visit the border in Yuma. About 3 weeks ago, I saw for myself people coming across the border in the middle of the night. And that poses a number of challenges. It poses the risk that illegal immigrants 10 million of them are occupying cities and towns across our great Commonwealth, and some of those tied to really violent crimes. Just in the last week, we had, as a father of 6 daughters, just the heartbreaking examples of a young 12-year-old murdered and raped in Houston, a young woman raped in New York, the killers prosecuted or indicted of Rachel Marin in Maryland. These are just terrifying things for all of us to know that that kind of violent crime and terrible evil is loose in our communities. But there's also the national security risk, where in the 10 million illegal migrants that have come across the border, we increasingly see a number of them that are associated with ISIS and terrorist organizations. 160 last year apprehended that were on the terrorist watch list. In my short visit to the border, I watched 50 people come across the border. 5 of them in front of me at 2 in the morning were military-age men from Syria. 5 were Chinese nationals. This is a national security threat that I think we don't really even begin to understand. And finally, there's the scourge of fentanyl, which the Attorney General has written about extensively. But fentanyl is killing 4,000 Pennsylvanians every year. Almost 100,000 Americans last year from fentanyl. Just to put that in perspective, in 8 years of war in Vietnam, we lost 53,000 Americans killed in action. We had 2 Vietnams last year. 2 Vietnams in America from fentanyl. And that's a scourge that we have to deal with, and I hope we'll have a chance to talk about. The other thing that's happening, and all of you know it well, is that we have urban decay and a challenge with law enforcement being able to fulfill its responsibilities. And the core of that, in many of our cities, like places like Philadelphia, are liberal prosecutors, like Larry Krasner, that are very permissive on crime. And so violent criminals are being put back on the streets. The standard by which, in terms of theft and other things that has to be met to be able to prosecute or put criminals in jail is not where it needs to be. And that's creating a climate where violent crime is flourishing in places like Philadelphia and coming into the suburbs. And it's a huge challenge in many parts of our state. The second related challenge is the lack of support for law enforcement. You can't have law and order, you can't have security, you can't have safety without law enforcement. And here in our great city of Pittsburgh, we're experiencing it firsthand. So in 2020, I went to visit FOP1. In 2020, we had 1,000 officers on the police force. Today, it's something like 750 on its way to 650. And the reason for that is this defund the police movement, the difficulty of serving as a police officer, the lack of qualified immunity, the lack of support from public officials saying law enforcement's critical to our future. In my neighborhood in Squirrel Hill, the number of patrols is about half what it was a few short years ago. Sheriff Slupe and I have talked about this a lot. He's been a great supporter and someone who sees this firsthand. And so this is a moment where we have to step back and say, what kind of leadership and what kind of policies do we need to get our country back on track in terms of safety and security for our citizens? Without law and order, you don't have a community, you don't have a society, and we've got real experts here to talk about it. So thank you for the opportunity.
So thank you, Dave. The very first question we have is for the general. So Pennsylvania we've seen a generation-altering epidemic of drugs, in particular fentanyl. As a district attorney, I've seen it firsthand. This is all across Pennsylvania. And people are very concerned because if our community is not safe, then nothing else matters. Very few people have the experience, very few people in the world have had the experience that you have had with regard to public safety. What can you tell us with regard to what you're seeing right now from the federal government and how they're handling crime in conjunction with how you would do it yourself and how you've seen things in the past?
Well, there's no question we're seeing a surge in crime around the country, and in the big cities. The last time we followed progressive law enforcement policies or crime policies was from 1963 to 1980 when Ronald Reagan was elected. And during those years, crime in the United States quadrupled. It was the biggest surge in crime in American history. When Reagan came in and some states started responding to this surge in crime, we started adopting tough law enforcement policies, working with other states to do that. And during the 80s, the crime rate went up only 11%, so it started flattening out. When I entered into the Attorney General's office in 1991, it was the peak of violent crime in the United States. It was still going up. 1992, it started going down, and it went down for 22 years, cut in half. And that continued until Obama started his war against police and started liberalizing the law and going back to revolving door justice. When President Trump came in, we pushed it back down again, and now it's going back up again. When I studied this 30 years ago, I came to the conclusion that it's actually pretty simple. About 1% of the people commit between half and 2/3 of the predatory violence. I'm not talking about crimes of passion. I'm talking about preying, one person preying on another. This has been borne out by other studies in other countries. Even Sweden found that 1% of the population commits 67% of the violent predatory crime. And the way I think about it, the very reason we have government is to protect the 99% of people so they can live their lives in peace by taking the 1% out of the picture and holding them so they cannot commit the predations they do. These are people, they don't commit one crime or two crimes. They commit scores of crimes whenever they're on the street, when they're on probation or parole. And the rate of crime in society is determined by how many of these people are out on the street versus being incapacitated. And when you have revolving door justice, you will have higher crime rates. And that's why when we started targeting the predatory repeat violent offenders and getting them off the street, the crime rates dropped as they did for 22 consecutive years. And the problem now is this Department of Justice, this administration, and in many states, the state governments and the local prosecutors are essentially trying to protect the 1% and let them run riot at the expense of the safety of the 99%. That's what's happening. It's very simple. Now, the federal government can do a lot here, and the Reagan administration, the Bush administration, and in the Trump administration, we work very closely with state and locals to target the very worst offenders. It's very easy to figure out who are the people who are the repeat offenders, including the ones that use guns in violent crime, and neutralizing them, put them away for significant penalties. The other thing is what's happening with juvenile justice. Studies show that if a young person starts embarking on a life of crime, it starts with some petty crimes and so forth, I'm not suggesting you lock them in jail and throw away the keys at the very first instance, but there have to be consequences. They have to understand that there's a price to be paid and it's not going to be tolerated. And studies show that if they keep on getting away with those early crimes, they become career criminals. And so the only chance we have of turning around some of these lives is to intervene early. And what a lot of these local prosecutors are doing, I'm not suggesting in Pittsburgh, but a lot of them are doing, are just not holding any of the juvenile offenders to account. And they think they're helping these people. They're not. They're creating another conveyor belt of career criminals. And so I would say that the important thing we have to do is bear in mind what the reason we have government. It's to protect the 99% of the people so they can live their lives in peace and hold to account the 1%. And frequently, if they serve their penalty and so forth, they can be rehabilitated. So that's my experience with it, and I think right now the reason crime is going up is because we're resuming the revolving door approach that was taken during the 60s and 70s. And if we continue to go down this road, we're going to have the same results.
Attorney General Barr, thank you for your insights. You know, when we talk about public safety, again, going back to our panel here, very few people have had an impact on criminal justice policy like Governor Corbett has. Obviously, as Attorney General and then as a governor, I mean, you've done a lot to impact a lot of the services, a lot of the funding and things that we do as district attorneys. From your perspective, what do you see happening right now, and what do you think we need to focus on?
Well, thank you for having me here today, and David, thank you for having me here. It's always good to see my former boss. You know, he was Deputy Attorney General when I first started as the U.S. Attorney in Pittsburgh, and then he got a promotion to be Attorney General. But we worked together quite a bit. I served on a committee there called the Attorney General's Advisory Committee, and was the last chair in the Republican administration to it. And you learn quite a bit about what's going on in the country as a whole, and you're able to take it back to your district or to your state, and it's stayed with me ever since. What he just described to you was a cyclical nature of crime in this country. If you enforce, crime goes down. If you back off, crime goes up. It's not rocket science. You all know it with your kids. I have 6 grandkids now. I'm a tough grandfather. You're probably a tough grandfather. You know, there's a line, you cross a line, but they want to know where the line is. And we see juvenile crime. We see other types of crime. When I was Attorney General, we went after the child predators back when it was first getting started. Created a tremendous program that many states came in and copied us after that. That was one area of crime. The drugs is a huge area of crime, and it keeps changing. When I was first in the DA's office and the U.S. Attorney's office, we were trying marijuana cases, big marijuana cases. Can I have a side note here? I'm against legalization of marijuana. Totally against it. It is the gateway drug. I know friends of mine, oh, it's not that big a deal. Yes, it is. You go back and ask some of the people, where did they get started? You know, smoking a joint behind the high school. So you take that, you have a no tolerance for that, and go forward. But then we went into other drugs. Heroin, huge problem. Methamphetamine. When I was Attorney General, we had to create task forces across the western half of the state because methamphetamine, something hard to make that isn't noticeable by the community around it. They do it in the woods, they do it in farms and so forth. We had to create joint task forces between local, state, and federal to go after the methamphetamine. And once we went after them, it went down. But now, a whole new ballgame. We didn't even know what fentanyl really was back when I was Attorney General. Even as a governor, it was just starting to be there. But there's always going to be a new type of drug for one reason: demand. Demand. And we need to work more on the demand side. I brought the General's book with me. I encourage you to buy one, read it. He doesn't need the royalties from it, but buy one and read it. Because it really sets out what we're supposed to do. We're talking about the number one role. This is what I teach my law students. The number one role of government is what? It's public safety. Now, when I ask the students, they're all over the board. But it's public safety. Because if you're not safe in your homes, you're not safe in your neighborhoods, you're not safe going to work or at work, what kind of community do you have? Who wants to live there? And, you know, especially up here in Butler County, this area has changed dramatically in the last 30 years. You're a much bigger, you were a little farm country, you know, General. This was farmland. In fact, this location was probably farmland 30 years ago. Now it's a booming, not a metropolis, but you know, trying to catch up to Pittsburgh. But with that, you get that 1% that you're talking about. So we're aimed at the 1%. Teamwork is one way to address that, and I encourage Dave. I know he's doing it as district attorney in York County, but also when he moves into the next position. You've got to build that team to go after it, and it has to be federal, state, and local. Now, there's oftentimes, as we well know, Sheriff, right, kind of rivalries between those different levels. That's the importance of the elected official to try and bend that down. and I'll finish with this and go back to the issue that the general mentioned. The progressive district attorneys. I hate using that word because they're not progressive. They're going backwards. They're trying to excuse people for their conduct. Oh, they didn't know better. Yes, they knew better. Okay? But it's that 1% that is affecting everybody. It's affecting your taxes. Think about that. You probably didn't think about that. We have to incarcerate those people. I'll finish with this. When I started as governor, our prison population was almost 50,000 in Pennsylvania, and an average rate of about $31,000, $32,000 per inmate. I had a very good, not progressive, aggressive Secretary of Corrections. We worked with our statutes. We reduced that number to about 35,000. We closed some prisons because we no longer needed them because that curve was going down. That curve is going back up now. Do we have to reopen the prisons? I hope not. But if we don't pay attention, number one, before job creation, before education, we have to pay attention to public safety.
I appreciate that. Those are outstanding remarks and completely on point. Dave, turning to you, as a prosecutor and as a dad, and I have a son who's going into 4th grade, I have seen just the tremendously sad and devastating impact of fentanyl before that heroin, and it turned into fentanyl really fast on our community. I've seen it destroy families, rip them apart. I've seen, when we were kids, and I'm not saying this applies to anyone in the room, but if you may have made a mistake, you might have a hangover. In today's world, a mistake could actually equal death.
Yeah.
And I'm so afraid of the world my son has to grow up in. We're doing everything we can to attack the demand, like the governor said. Everything from working with schools to keep kids from turning to drugs, to helping get people into treatment that need to be there. But at the same time, we do have to worry about the supply. And if you're elected United States Senator, how will you help the citizens of Pennsylvania with regard to our border, of which fentanyl is flowing over every single day in our communities?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking. I agree with you and the governor that the demand side is very important, but the supply side, we can do so much, and we've failed so desperately to close the border and address the supply side of this. And the first thing it starts with, which is securing the border. And you and I have talked about this, but when President Biden came into office, knowing that he was going to change his policies, and we would try to imagine how bad it could get, we would have never imagined it would get this bad. The permissiveness of the border, 10 million people coming across the border. I was down in Yuma, and you can see the wall. You're walking along, and then the wall just stops. A couple hundred yards away, there's a storage area where steel is stacked. That was supposed to go in the wall, but the Biden administration stopped the contract. So it's wide open, and you see people walking across the border, as I described. But the fentanyl is a particular problem that I think we can address if we take aggressive action. The ingredients of fentanyl are, for the most part, manufactured in China. It is shipped to Mexico. We could do a lot to interdict those fentanyl ingredients coming from China. Imagine if we thought they were nuclear materials, plutonium, that was going to go into a nuclear bomb. We'd do something, right? This is plutonium. It's killing 100,000 Americans every year. And when it gets into Mexico, the cartels take control. The cartels own the border. The general and I were just talking. The number one revenue source for the cartels has historically been the fentanyl. It's now becoming human exploitation, human trafficking. But the cartels take a hold of those ingredients. They manufacture the fentanyl, and they send it across the border. And there's now enough fentanyl in the United States to kill the entire American population a couple times over. And so we have to destroy the cartels and stop that flow. So we have to finish the border wall. We have to fund the border patrol. We have to have adequate security at the border. But then I think we need to take one step further, which is we need to go after the cartels. And we need to go across the border into Mexico and destroy the cartels and use our military capability in a very targeted, sophisticated way. We have the technology. We have the drones. We have the special operations to go in and take care of those cartels and destroy them. They are our enemy. They are terrorists. They are killing Americans. We're treating this without sort of a recognition of the scale or scope of the threat to our families. And the 100,000 people that died, as terrible as that is, that's the tip of the iceberg. Underneath the water is a huge burden of addiction, destruction of families, destruction of communities. We got to put an end to this, and it requires decisive action.
Yep. I appreciate that, Dave. And you know, our families and our children are the foundation of our entire society. And as a citizen, I mean, I'm happy to hear that this is an absolute priority for you, because if our community is not safe, then nothing else matters.
Yeah.
It's that simple. So turning to Attorney Parenti, thank you so much for being here with us. Now, you're from this area, correct?
Correct. I'm from Slippery Rock.
So you're from
Butler
Slippery
County.
Rock.
Yes.
For those that don't know, that's Slippery Rock
Yes.
is a university.
Yep. There's a university there, small
And
college
what's your
town.
mascot?
Rocky, I think, is the mascot of Slippery Rock University.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. So as an attorney, I know you've been active in a lot of things in your community. You grew up here. I'm curious what your observations are and what you have to say about this issue of public safety, in particular in this area here that we're at today in Western Pennsylvania.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I thank you for having me here on this panel of very esteemed individuals, and thank you for being such a force and team in fighting the things that we face today in crime and in drugs. It's just speaking as a local attorney, as a mom, as a citizen, it's very upsetting to hear just on a daily basis from the kids in the community. As you stated, I do work with school districts. The schools are unfortunately children in elementary ages are seeing fentanyl, and it's upsetting. Just to hear the talk and the plans and hopefully what we'll get in place to fight fentanyl on a much higher level is wonderful, because it's upsetting, and that's what I hear the most of, I think, is the concerns about the drugs and how do we stop this and how is it getting to our small communities and what can we do and why isn't anyone doing anything. So I think that's what we would love to see more of.
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate that insight, especially from a mom.
Oh.
Because again, you know, we all go back to how critical it is to protect our children. They're the future.
Yes.
And so I appreciate that tremendously.
Thank you.
Sheriff, it's great to see you here with us today. You know, I joked earlier, but in all sincerity, you have been a leader, not only locally, but statewide with the Sheriff's Association. And I'd like to kind of take it from a macro down to more of a micro level here. You know, it's easy to enact policies and then kind of walk away from them. What are some of the issues you're seeing on a local level with you as a sheriff, with law enforcement? You know, what are some of the things that are impacting you that have occurred as a result of policies that may not be the best?
Sure. The Attorney General mentioned it. A prior president starts making his opinion known before the facts of a case are already out there, creating a buzz around a police officer who's literally innocent of what they've done, but have been guilty because the president said they're guilty, they this and that and everything. It's not fair to the police officer at all. So we did have a president that let the criminal justice system work. And guess what? Most of the police officers were found to be in the right. Having someone's back as a police officer, and I'm guessing everybody in this room loves their local police. Thank you. Yes. And there are some that don't, and I don't understand why. We live in Butler County, and we have great respect from the citizenry here, and I love that. Day doesn't go by that says, thank you for what you do. But policies that are produced by the federal government, there was at one time, there were 5 policies that I had to enact in our office just so we would be eligible for federal grants. If I didn't do that, then I'm not eligible for federal grants. I don't get a lot of federal grants, but the point is, if I ever needed one, I'd have to have these policies done. Policies are reactionary. Somebody did something, oh, we gotta make a law. You might see that in your local jurisdictions. Oh, they're burning. Nope, we gotta make a law. Can't burn. That's what's happening with incidents involving police officers. 99.99999% of the police officers out there are good, hardworking individuals, men and women, who want to go home after their shift. They absolutely want to serve their communities. That's why they got into this. But when you have leadership in wherever, what level, demeaning you, why would anyone want to be a police officer today? Look at the numbers. You can't find anybody to be a police officer these days. The academies, police departments, they used to have 40,000 people in the state to apply for the state police. Now they're down to like 4,000. That's incredible. Why? You listen to the TV all the time. There's always, oh, police are bad, defund, the whole night. Dave gets it. He took basically most of my answers. He gets it. It's really impressive. He gets the issue with crime and policies and public safety. It's a shame. When this gets turned around, like the governor said, there's a cyclical thing. People start supporting their police, enacting policies that literally unhandcuff police officers to do their job. They're afraid to make traffic stops. Why would you? You're either going to get sued or some government agency is going to come in and arrest you for something. They'll make it up, right? They'll make a crime up. I'm sorry. It's very disturbing that policies can really dictate in law enforcement what you do and what you got to think about. In law enforcement, you can't think all the time. Someone runs in here with a gun, I can't think. I have to react. Seconds. Ladies and gentlemen, seconds. Which we all know the courts later on, investigations later on, every millisecond is now under scrutiny because somebody had a camera. Somebody had their cell phone on. You are always under the microscope. Police need the backing of not only their community. Why? Because you vote. You vote these lawmakers, policymakers into their offices. Like I said before, Dave gets it. Yes, I'd love to see him as our next United States Senator, 100%. But this needs fixed. I'm done.
Well, yeah. Sheriff, I appreciate that. I know this is very passionate and very serious for you. And so we definitely appreciate your insight on that for sure. Dave McCormick, you've heard a lot of different things today. So you've heard it all the way from, the county DA asking questions, but you've heard it from the former governor, Attorney General of the United States, a sheriff, a mother in the community. What are your thoughts with regard to everything you're hearing today? And what do you want to do with that if you're the United States Senator with regard to making our community safer? Because that is what this is about.
Yeah, well, I think, for all public leaders, it comes down to what do we all want as members of a community, as family? We want safety and security. We want economic security. We want to know that our kids can work hard and live the American dream. We want to know that we can go to bed at night and feel safe in our homes. We want the basic things. This is not too much to ask. And public officials, I think, have to start. Your senator has to start with a keen sense of the profound responsibility for public safety, physical security, right? And the way you do this is, I think we've heard lots of expertise at the table, but you have to look at what the problems are and get to the root causes. And the root causes, in the end, come down to leadership. The absence of leadership dealing with the border, the absence of leadership of taking on the cartels, the absence of leadership in creating the right sort of financial resources for our law enforcement officers, men and women, the lack of leadership with our prosecutors in terms of putting violent crimes. So this is first and foremost a public safety problem, but behind that's a leadership problem. And so I think getting the right leaders in place that can take this on with the seriousness that it deserves, with a profound commitment to making significant changes is where this all starts.
I appreciate that a lot, Dave. And I'm going to pull a slight audible here probably the consternation of someone. But I just want to hit one point very quickly. And you brought this up in your discussion about the border and the cartels. And just very simply, General Barr, how serious is this threat to our country and to Pennsylvania, the actual cartels themselves?
They are a mortal danger in the sense that, as Dave was saying, they are murdering. This is killing. Okay, these drugs with moral certainty will kill people. It's like shooting into a crowd. You know you will be killing people. And the drugs are made to represent Adderall and other drugs, so the kids don't know what they're taking. They think they're taking benign drugs or drugs that aren't going to hurt them anyway. It's murder. And they're killing over 100,000 Americans a year, which is, Dave said, is like 2 Vietnams. It's also the peak casualties we had during any single year of World War II. So we're experiencing these kinds of casualties, and they have complete impunity on the Mexican side. They're extremely powerful, wealthy. Their saying is that you take silver or you take lead. That is, they corrupt the government by saying to government officials, if you fight us, we'll kill you and you'll kill your family. If you're with us, we'll pay you. And they are able to corrupt the Mexican government. So, as Dave said, we've created another business for them. It used to be drugs. But now, with the border open, they are now, essentially trafficking people. That's a new line of business, and it's more valuable to them than even the drug trafficking. Also remember, people are focused on fentanyl, and they should be, but there's a general shift going on in drugs, which is they're moving from organic drugs to synthetic drugs. And so you have drugs like methamphetamine, and in many communities, they're being ravaged by methamphetamine, which is also a deadly drug. It just takes longer to kill you, and it blights lives. So new drugs are coming. Nitazines are coming that are even more deadly than fentanyl. And the source for these synthetic drugs is China, and China subsidizes their companies to make and export these drugs, which are illegal in the world, illegal in China, illegal in the United States. They have no legal purpose, but they're being subsidized to get them into the United States. So there's a lot more we can be doing. We can be lowering the boom on China, threatening sanctions on China if they don't clean that up. We can be going after the cartels, as Dave said. We're not talking about dropping bombs all over Mexico. We have gotten special operations and other things to a point where in Syria, with a very small force, we were able to defeat 75,000 ISIS troops. So we can disrupt the cartels and force the Mexican government to be more aggressive. There are things we can do to shut down the supply.
Thank you, General. So we have time for some questions from the audience. I think, do we have anyone ready to roll? Attorney King, nice to see you today.
Thank you very much. I don't know if I need this or not, but first of all, it's an honor to be here today, General Barr, and to have you here with us in Butler County, and to have Governor Corbett back home. This is his second home, Butler County. So I want to say that recently, and this is a question for Dave McCormick, and by the way, thank you for your service to the United States of America, and I wish Bob Casey would stop lying about you. I wanted to ask the question about the border and what your thoughts might be. We recently saw President Biden issue 2 executive orders. One order had to do with an attempt, I believe, an attempt on his part to try to make him look stronger with respect to the 10, 12, 18 million people who have already illegally come here. So he issued an executive order that had to do with denial of amnesty. And then he then issued a second order that granted amnesty to about 500,000 illegal immigrants who were already here, providing them with a path to citizenship and the right to register and vote. I wondered if you had the same take on that as I did, or what your position or what your thoughts on that might be. But again, thanks, Dave, for everything you've done
Thanks,
for the
Tom.
country.
Thank you for saying that. I think, I honestly think what President Biden has done is really the height of cynicism, because there's been 3.5 years of not doing anything on the border. And then there's this last ditch effort where there's legislation proposed. That legislation that, if you had put that legislation in place, if that had been passed, would have made the United States the most permissive country in the industrialized world of any country in Europe, any country in Asia, of bringing illegal immigrants in and then granting them asylum. So I thought the legislation that was proposed was not good, but more than that, President Biden had the power within his hands from the very first day of his presidency to stop this flow, and he didn't. And now when we're 6 months, 5 months, I guess, away from an election, all of a sudden, he now discovers he has the ability to use the executive order. And my opponent, Bob Casey, has been with President Biden every step of the way on this, 98% of the time, and has been supportive of all these policies that have left open the borders: the lack of funding for the border wall, the lack of funding for Border Patrol, the lack of enforcement of Kate's Law, which would allow us to prosecute violent felons. So I think what you're seeing is another cynical ploy. I think the efforts by the administration to reduce the flow are going to have limited impact, and a big part of the reason that the number of immigrants coming across the border is slowing is because at this time of year, it's the absolute hottest. The flow is already going to slow. And then I think the issue of granting a path to citizenship gets to the most fundamental problem, which is, if you create, from a business perspective, I've been a business person for most of my life, incentives are everything. So if people think that there is a path to coming into the United States illegally and then becoming a legal citizen, that's going to encourage more people to come. That's why many people are coming. In some ways, you can't fault the people for coming. This is the greatest country in the world. They want to have an opportunity in this greatest country in the world. If we show them a path, they're going to continue to come illegally. So we have to say definitively, there is not a path to citizenship if you enter the country by breaking our laws. And that's part of the way you're going to have to stop the flow. And, my wife is a legal immigrant. I'm a huge fan of, I think legal immigration is critical to the future of our great country. But we have to match a reformed legal immigration system with a strong, secure border that ensures that illegal immigration, which threatens us in so many ways, comes to a halt.
Thank you, Dave. My wife is as well, so we definitely share that. Do we have any? Sam DeMarco. Nice to see you, Sam.
Thanks, Dave. This question's for Attorney General Barr. General Barr, we've seen a disgusting rise in anti-Semitism and protests on our college campuses, outside of synagogues, and our communities. Now, I know that from a law enforcement perspective, it's not solely the jurisdiction of the Department of Justice. But how do you handle the balance between free speech and violent behavior and rhetoric? How did you address this during the summer riots in 2020?
Well, we tried to be very clear during the summer of 2020 that there's no problem with demonstrating or protesting as long as it's peaceful and nonviolent and complies with the law. But once you start using violence, then it's not protest and demonstration, it's criminal activity, and it has to be stopped. And I think we're seeing the opposite approach being taken, which is hands off these people on the campuses that are involved in violence and threatening physical assault and threatening behavior. And we see, for example, in New York, charges being dropped against all the people involved in the violence in Colombia and the hostage taking in Colombia. They took janitors and held them in the building. So I think that has to, we have to maintain that distinction between legitimate First Amendment activity and violence. And this administration hasn't been doing that.
Thank you, General. I appreciate that. That's unbelievably insightful. And I'd like to, I think time-wise, let me see here. I think time-wise, we have to wrap here in a second. So I'm sure that we'll be around to talk after, but I want to take a minute to just pass it to Dave McCormick, do you have anything you'd like to say before we wrap it up here today?
Well, no, first of all, thank you so much for all of you being here. Thank you to America's Future for hosting another great event, and thank you for all the panelists for being part of it. And Dave, you're a distinguished district attorney in your own right and have done an incredible job in your county. So there may be something else you want to add that as someone who's been so successful on this. But I think that what you've heard from a distinguished panel here is very consistent, which is we need leadership to sort of embrace what's becoming a real problem for our communities, for our families. And it's not a problem of knowing what to do. It's a problem of finding the leadership to go do it. So thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Dave. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. Thank you, everyone, for being on the panel. This is an unbelievably distinguished panel. And, just very simply, if our community's not safe, nothing else matters. If our family's not safe, if our children aren't safe, and, our families are the foundation of our country and our community. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and hope everybody has a wonderful day. Yep. Thank you, Governor. Good job.